MSW Media.
The rule of law is not just some lawyer's turn of phrase. It is the very foundation of our democracy. The essence of the rule of law is that like cases are treated alike. That there not be one rule for Democrats and another for Republicans, one rule for the powerful, another for the powerless, one rule for the rich and another for the poor, or different rules depending upon one's race or ethnicity. To serve as Attorney General at this critical time is a calling I am honored and eager to answer.
So now it's clean up on aisle 45 time. And for a long while yet, it is going to be clean up on aisle 45.
Welcome to episode 181 of Clean Up on Aisle 45. It's Wednesday, July 10th, 2024. I'm Allison Gill.
And I'm Pete Struck. We have a lot to cover today, including Ruby Freeman and Moss asking the judge to throw out Rudy Giuliani's bankruptcy case, and a former Trump staffer alleging multiple settlements over harassment and discrimination for someone named Boris.
Oh, Boris.
Wonder who that could be.
How many Borises do we know hang out with Trump?
Boris Badenoff, one of the Moose and Squirrel. It must be him. I can't think of any Boris.
Boris Smith. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we have more Jim Comer shenanigans that we're going to talk about, and some ex-DOJ officials concerned about the fallout from the Supreme Court's broad immunity ruling for the former guy. But first, the media is a lot of noise right now, so we want to thank our new patrons for supporting independent media. This week it includes Jilly Bean, the Administrator General of Scandinavia, Scotty Emery Moore, Ed, Margaret Kanosian, Alicia Weeks, and Gnashing My Teeth in Huckfuckistan. Huckfuckistan? I think that's where Sarah Huckabee Sanders is governor. So, the media right now, it's a little tough. It's, I think, like wall to wall. Joe Biden is old. And I think we, really should just be waiting to see how this plays out. I'm convinced that everybody within the sounds of our voices, Pete, is going to vote for the Dem, regardless of who it is. But it seems to be taking a lot longer to play out than I thought it would.
Yeah, and some of this, there is space for a reasonable discussion about whether or not, following the debate performance, President Joe Biden is in a place where he is a viable candidate. And that's a reasonable question to ask. And there should be an ability to have a reasonable conversation. But I've been stunned. The level of sort of anger and backslashing, backbiting, angry comment back and forth across the range of, and you've got a range of commentators, right? There are people who are traditional Democrats. You've got people from different Democratic administrations. You have the Never Trumpers who came over from the Republican Party. You've got a wide bunch of people who have different opinions. But, let's find out a way to have a reasonable discussion. And I have every confidence that, I observe politics, but I am not a expert in politics in the way people like Nancy Pelosi or the various, current and former chairs
Hakeem
of the
Jeffries,
DNC and Hakeem Jeffries. These are people, the governors across the U.S. are attuned to the political scene. And yeah, of course, there's a bunch of motivations. They want to, get the Democratic nominee reelected. They want to, for some of them, preserve their opportunity to run in 2028. This is always things that are at play in politics. But God damn it. I just wish people would take a step back, take a pause, let the debate take place in a reasonable way. It seems clear, at least at this point, from what Joe Biden is saying, that he has every intention firmly of running. And if that's what the decision is, then, everybody line up behind him and let's go. But stop. We don't need ill feelings and hatred and animosity growing and building. It just doesn't serve anybody positively.
Yeah, no, I agree. And Tim Snyder, he authored On Tyranny. I wrote recently, he was just on with Nicole Wallace saying that one source of the negative energy that we're seeing is Trump's fascism, and focusing on it will not answer the question of what Democrats do, but it will help us to understand the context in which the discussion is taking place. And he says, by fascism, I just have in mind the cult of personality of a leader, the party that becomes a single party, the threat and use of violence, and the big lie that must be accepted and used to reshape reality. In this case, that Trump can never lose an election. And it's gotten to the point, at least for me, where if you have a reasonable discussion, that's one thing. But if you're tearing down the potential candidate, that could backfire later this year. So that's kind of what we're up against right now. That's the media landscape. So again, thanks to our patrons for supporting us and independent media. And with all that in mind, I want to turn to Jim Comer because this plays into it. Jim Comer, who we know recently called for an investigation into the politicization of the Bureau of Prisons because Matt Gaetz wasn't allowed to visit Pete Navarro. And now he's set his sights on Merrick Garland and Joe Biden's doctor. So as you may have heard, last week we learned that Comer and Jordan are now suing Merrick Garland for the audio tapes of the interview between Robert Hur and Joe Biden during the special counsel probe into Biden's handling of classified documents. I can guarantee this lawsuit will go absolutely nowhere, especially in light of the Supreme Court granting Biden permission to collude with his attorney general, but not that he would, and he didn't. But that aside, it's because this lawsuit has no merit. The incumbent, Joe Biden, has deemed the audio protected by executive privilege, and there's no getting around that. And now, in his latest bid to be the most idiotic member of the House, Jim Comer has called on President Joe Biden's physician, Dr. Kevin O'Connor, to appear before the House Oversight Committee behind closed doors, mind you, to testify about Biden's health and his quote-unquote business schemes, Pete. So, of course, while demanding the audio of the Hur-Biden interview out of one side of his mouth, he's refusing to release the audio of his closed-door interviews. And that Comer now wants to get Biden's doctor behind closed doors to interview him so he can obviously cherry-pick what he says and release it to the public. Now, Comer goes on to say that Dr. O'Connor and his medical assessments may have been influenced by his business pursuits with the Biden family. So just more garbage from the House Republican clown show. And, you know, it's illegal to try to get a doctor to tell you about one of their patients. So I don't think this is going to go anywhere either. But, you know, we'll see if he ends up subpoenaing him and then a lawsuit, you know. But let's be honest. These lawsuits are going to languish well beyond this election and this Congress. And if the Dems get the gavel back, they'll just disappear, kind of like Jim Jordan's subpoena to appear before the January 6th Select Committee. So it's an interesting spot, but of course it's just all political theater coming from the Jims.
Yeah, and it's not going to get anywhere. And I think even if you have I hope the Dems retake the House, but even if they don't and the Republicans keep it and say you had a Trump reelected, that there would be some way that those records would be, taken and unavailable so that even if they wanted to, they couldn't turn them over. But this is one of those things that worries me at the end of the day. And we talked about it, I think, last episode or the episode before that, right after the Supreme Court ruling. It, on the one hand, is yes, there's a huge amount of power that they gave to the presidency, but they kept for themselves. At the end of the day, they are the ones who make the decision about whether or not something is an official act, whether or not the president is immune from something. So while ostensibly it's giving a lot of power to the presidency, the reality is it's giving a lot of the power to the presidency of the particular president that the Supreme Court wants to give it to. And I am not convinced that these broad powers and authorities, if Joe Biden tried to exercise them, would fall under the same sort of beneficent, happy smile of John Roberts and, Sam Alito and Clarence Thomas and, Kavanaugh and Gorsuch. And I have some hesitancy about, the universal applicability of this ruling to a president of either party. But, hopefully we don't ever have to sort of see where that goes. And, the other hand is, too, if we get to that point and Joe Biden wasn't reelected, one, we're, going to have bigger fights on our hands. And two, who cares? But I mean, he does, but it won't, there'll be much bigger fights to fight.
Right. Yeah. Very, very true. And something else that's interesting that happened, we've been like, Dick Durbin, use your subpoena power, investigate the Supreme Court. As it turns out, they actually do need 60 votes to issue a subpoena over there in the Senate. And they don't have them. Republicans are going to block that. But what they're doing now, the Senate Judiciary, is working with House Democrats. Of course, we have the minority, right? We're in the minority right now. But I'd like to say when, not if, but when we get the gavel back. We'll get it back in January. They're working to stand up with the Senate Judiciary. They want to stand up a January 6th like commission investigation in the House into the Supreme Court, because you don't need that supermajority filibuster style vote in order to get subpoenas issued from House committees. So that is what they're currently working on, so that when Congress flips and once that gavel changes hands, they can hit the ground running with this. And I'm very glad to learn that they're doing this over there. And then one other quick piece back on the medical thing. I saw Karine Jean-Pierre in the White House press room taking questions from the White House press corps. And they were grilling her on this neurologist who has visited the White House multiple times and answered their questions. He's had 3 neurological exams, one every year for every time he has his physical exam. And that he's been the neurologist on the White House team since 2021. And it just so happens that this neurologist writes or has written papers or a paper about Parkinson's disease. And so the media is making this connection that that the president is being examined for Parkinson's. But I just want to put this out there because I've worked closely with Walter Reed. I've worked in healthcare and public health for a very long time. It's what I have a doctorate in. And just because you are an expert or you have expertise in an area as a neurologist does not mean that that is the only thing that you do. And for example, Pete, my shrink, my PsyD, she is an expert and has written many papers on PTSD for first responders, police and firefighters. And my GYN, she is an expert on ectopic pregnancies. I am neither a first responder nor have I ever had an ectopic pregnancy. This is just who my physicians are, and and it has nothing to do with your specific area of expertise. Joe Biden had a full neurological workup in January. They put out the report in February, and that everything is fine. And so this kind of disingenuous badgering on a story put out, by the way, by the New York Post, okay, the Hunter Biden laptop people, who one of the byline, one of the writers was like, I'm not putting my name on this shit. So they're basing all this on that, and they're taking up time badgering the press secretary from the White House pool of reporters. And it's bizarre, and it's part of this, I think, media onslaught that we're seeing. And of course, Jim Comer wants to get to the bottom of it. So that's the spot we're in right now.
Yeah. And I cannot imagine everybody saying, oh, Biden should go out and, show up in the press room. There is no way, given the screaming and shouting of questions about him, that there would be any decorum whatsoever from the press corps. I mean, I have no expectation they could, acquit themselves with any sort of, professional demeanor. And 2, that after a couple of questions, they wouldn't continue coming back to the same question. Somebody asked, I saw that they asked Karine Jean-Pierre, why don't you bring Biden out here? And she's like, well, you remember what happened, the last guy did that. And what she didn't add is, and he came out and he stood here and he told people to inject bleach. So, come on, come on. This is one of those things. And the reason, you were talking at the top of the show, there's not a lot of news. There's not a lot of news because the news is working themselves into a fit about all of this. And again, it is a reasonable question. It is something that the political leadership of the Democratic Party is going to do, whether that's at the federal or state level. And, people can weigh in, and that's the path forward. So just stop. And in the meantime, How many since the presidential debate, what was that, 2 Thursdays ago? How many events has Trump participated in? Just curious.
Zero.
Funny.
Events.
Funny, right? But let's talk about stamina. And, he's having one down at, just off the 18th hole at one of his resorts where he can go and get a, group of, cult followers wearing, red, white, and blue suits and gaudy, kind of inappropriate dresses with horribly done plastic surgery to adore him and do odd things. It's just, if you compare the expectations and the behavior that has occurred after the debate, and Trump, to his credit, hasn't said a word, which is smart because the entire media ecosystem is doing it for him. Yeah. How about somebody say let's talk about Trump's ability and stamina. Where is he? And all this stuff about we don't want Biden going to like these friendly environments. We want him to do a town hall. We want him to show up and do a press, step up to the press, in the briefing room in the White House. Okay, well, then do the same with Trump and make him face questions that aren't softballs. Do it. I'm all for it. But
right. Yeah, me too. And zero appearances by Trump. On the other side, we have Biden making 18 appearances, some off prompter, some on prompter, in 8 cities over 10 days, 9 days actually. But, I don't think he had any on the 10th day. And I got to tell you, Pete, I just did 4 appearances in 3 cities in 6 days, and I was a wreck after. It took me a week to recover, and he keeps doing it. So, but it's never, they've set this standard for Biden and zero standards for Trump, and that's just, I guess, just where we are in this media landscape. So, once again, I can't thank our patrons enough and the listeners to this program. Thank you so much, because we have other news that we need to get to, and we're going to do that right after this break. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Hey, welcome back. We have more new patrons to thank, including Eileen Gauris, my apologies if I mispronounced that, Ray, Cynthia Hathaway, Bruce Prendergast, Deborah, she, hers. What is this, a center for ants? And Kathy Goldschmidt. I think I'd love that movie. Love that movie. I think Alan. I think you mentioned. I think you said something
3 times.
Yeah, I think you mentioned something about that in the past, like bonus or something. But anyway, thank all of you for allowing us to put this together and get it out to you. Thank you for being part of the team. And with that, let's talk about Rudy Giuliani and specifically his bankruptcy. Now, this story
because he's already been permanently disbarred in New York. So
in New York, right? So this story comes from Dave Collins, who writes, Rudy Giuliani's creditors, including 2 former Georgia election workers who won a $148 million defamation judgment against him, are opposing his attempt to convert his bankruptcy into a liquidation, saying the likely ask that the case be thrown out instead because of what they call his flouting of bankruptcy laws. The comments came Wednesday during a status hearing on Zoom before U.S. bankruptcy judge Sean Lane in White Plains, New York. The former New York mayor and Donald Trump advisor filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy reorganization in December, days after the former election workers Ruby Freeman and her daughter, Wandrea Shea Moss, won their defamation case. They said Giuliani's targeting of them because of Trump's lies about the 2020 election being stolen led to death threats that made them fear for their lives. Philip Dublin, a lawyer for a committee of Giuliani's creditors, and Rachel Strickland, an attorney for Freeman and Moss, accused Giuliani of failing to turn over financial documents, ignoring bankruptcy court orders, and trying to delay the process through litigation tactics. They said they'll likely ask that the bankruptcy case be dismissed at another hearing on July 10th. Quote, our view is we do not have a good faith debtor. He has misbehaved every step of the way, Dublin said about Giuliani, continuing, we think again that the debtor here has been trying to game the system. Strickland added, for the last 6 months, my clients and the committee have been sounding alarm bells about Mr. Giuliani's problematic conduct, including his underhanded litigation tactics. We think that the conversion request to liquidation just underscores the bad faith approach and don't think that this is a party that should be allowed to exploit the bankruptcy process any longer. Giuliani's bankruptcy lawyer, Gary Fishoff, did not directly address those allegations in court and did not immediately return a message seeking comment after the hearing. He told the judge that Giuliani has the right to convert the case to a Chapter 7 liquidation.
Yeah, and let's talk about this, because this is what Alex Jones did successfully. But if Rudy's case is converted to a liquidation, which Rudy requested on Monday, a trustee would be appointed to take control of his assets and sell many of them off to help pay the creditors, like Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss. If the case is dismissed, Freeman and Moss could bring their effort to collect their $148 million back to the court in D.C., where they won their lawsuit, and avoid having to pay more legal fees for bankruptcy court. Freeman and Moss, meanwhile, have a pending request before the judge to declare that the $148 million judgment cannot be discharged or dismissed during Giuliani's bankruptcy. Now, the bankruptcy is part of the legal quagmire that Giuliani is in across the country. Only part of it. On Tuesday, the former federal prosecutor was disbarred, as we said. He has lost his right to be an attorney in New York permanently after a court found he repeatedly made false statements about Trump's 2020 election loss. Now, Giuliani is also facing the possibility of losing his law license in D.C. A board in May, as we know, recommended he be disbarred, though the court has to have the final say. That's the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. In Georgia and Arizona, Giuliani is facing criminal charges over his role in the effort to overturn the election. He has pled not guilty in both cases. And when he filed for bankruptcy, Giuliani listed nearly $153 million in existing or potential debts. He owes $153 million, including almost $1 million in state and federal tax liabilities. Funny, he was never indicted for that, like Hunter Biden was. Money he owes his lawyers, and many millions of dollars in potential judgments and lawsuits against him. And he estimated he had assets worth $1 million to $10 million, just somewhere in that range, just ballparking it. 1 million to 10 million. And his most recent financial filings in this particular bankruptcy court, he said he had about $94,000 cash in hand at the end of May, while his company, Giuliani Communications, had about $237,000. A main source of income for Giuliani over the past 2 years has been a retirement account with a balance of just over $1 million. And that was in May, down from nearly $2.5 million in 2022 after his withdrawals, the filings say. Or maybe he was invested in DJT stock. I'm not sure. He spent his money on Trump NFTs and Trump bucks and Trump shoes. Who knows where all that money went? In May, he spent nearly $33,000, including nearly $28,000 for a condo and a co-op cost for his Florida and New York City homes. Jesus. He also spent about $850 on food, $390 on cleaning, $230 on medicine, $200 on laundry. And by the way, that $230 on medicine is probably capped now because of Joe Biden. That's probably why it's so cheap, his medicine. And $200 on laundry, $190 on vehicles. And that was for May, I believe, just in May alone.
Yeah, I'm calling shenanigans on those numbers. I mean, look, at 33 at a burn of 33,000 a month. I mean, that puts you for 12 months, what, 390, just over almost 400,000 roughly. To be spending at that rate, there is no way that with your cash on hand of like $1 million and, 237 in the bank, you can't sustain that lifestyle. And the other thing, $850 on food for you, me, our listeners may sound like a lot. For somebody like Giuliani, who's hanging out at the Havana Club, smoking cigars in Manhattan and living large, that is not $30 a day is not going to do it. $30, he's going to burn through that. So, I mean, a bunch of potential options, right? He's not paying for his own food. He's relying on the handouts and largesse of others. He's always relied on the kindness of others. But it's just what galls me is at the end of the day, this person is complete contempt. And it's one thing if you're Donald Trump and you've spent your entire life living contemptuously towards the legal system of the United States. But if you're Rudy Giuliani, who is a prosecutor, who was a U.S. attorney, who was a mayor, I would have hoped that there would have been a little more respect for the system, for our judicial process. But no, I don't know. Those numbers don't add up to me. I would be shocked if there weren't hidden assets somewhere. And maybe I hope Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman's legal team has a decent idea where those assets may be parked. But it just strikes me as a huge amount of shenanigans here. Alternatively, if Rudy Giuliani is on the highway to hell and he's about to crash and burn sometime in the next 6 to 8 months, because all of his debt and legal proceedings and disbarments catch up with him, great. Good riddance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know what I would look? I would look over at Andrew Giuliani. Maybe he's hiding some assets in his one blue suit that he owns, that he wears everywhere. And it's not a good blue either. Not to suit shame, but I'm gonna. It's not a good suit. When I was at the Cohen trial, or not the Cohen trial, the Trump trial with Cohen and Stormy Daniels testifying in Manhattan. He was there, like marching up and down the street, arms up, yelling about shit, being on TV. He's just a real weird dude, and I bet that, like Alex Jones wants to liquidate all his shit so that he can get away with just paying his creditors what he's worth right now, and then going to work back doing what he's doing, but having it all funneled through his dad. I think that this for Rudy, it's gonna be through Andrew, because I don't think anybody else would touch him.
Yeah, I think that's
honestly.
right.
But we'll see. We'll keep you posted. We do have more news, as a matter of fact. Believe it or not, there's more news that happened this week. We're going to go over it right after this quick break. Stick around. We'll be right back. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. We have more new patrons to thank. Thank you so much. D.M. Stein, Laughing Gravy. Oh, is it like mushroom gravy, or like a biscuits and gravy, or is it more like how my Italian friend calls marinara sauce gravy?
It could be a tomato-based gravy, depending on where you're from on the East Coast.
Old Rugger, Marianne Williams, not Marianne, but Marianne Williams. Can I call you Kate? Yes, you can. Butthead, and Daniel Vincent. All right, so thank you very, very much. We could not do this without you, and we look forward to our next Zoom call Q&A. We're going to try to do these monthly now, same with the Daily Beans, but also with Cleanup on Aisle 45. We'll keep you posted on that. Our next story comes from David Rode at NBC. Some former Justice Department officials who served under Trump during his first term fear that the Supreme Court's recent immunity ruling will make it easier for him to use the department against his enemies if he's reelected president. And this is kind of like a no shit moment, but this is what's interesting. Other ex-officials downplayed the impact of the ruling or endorsed it. So 2 former Justice Department officials who spoke on the condition of anonymity said the ruling would embolden Donald Trump. They said it would give Trump cover to improperly pressure the Justice Department for his own political benefit, to prosecute an enemy or go easy on an ally by saying he was executing his official duties as president. Quote, it gives him tacit approval to keep doing it. That's what a former official said, who asked not to be named, referring to the Supreme Court ruling. Quote, it sets him up to do the things he said he was going to do, to investigate people and send them to jail. Now, as we all know by now, the majority opinion by Chief Justice Roberts found that Trump's attempts to overturn the results of the 2020 election by pushing Justice Department officials to launch investigations on unfounded claims of voter fraud were absolutely immune from prosecution. Absolutely immune, and can't be brought in as evidence. Quote, the indictment's allegations that the requested investigations were shams or proposed for improper purpose do not divest the president of exclusive authority over the investigative and prosecutorial functions of the Justice Department and its officials. That's frightening, and that's from Chief Justice Roberts. Goes on to say, because the president cannot be prosecuted for conduct within his exclusive constitutional authority, Trump is absolutely immune from prosecution for the alleged conduct involving his discussions with Justice Department officials.
Now, shockingly enough, Jeffrey Clark, the low-level Justice Department official whom Trump tried to appoint acting Attorney General on January 3rd, 2021, praised the ruling. After half dozen senior Justice Department officials threatened to resign, Trump backed off on appointing Clark, who supported his claims of voter fraud and had planned to send a Justice Department letter asking officials in Georgia not to certify those election results. Quote, he can investigate whom he sees fit to investigate, working with the Justice Department, unquote, said Clark, referring to any president in an interview for our podcast this week. Quote, and he can prosecute whom he sees fit to prosecute, unquote. I as an aside, I'm shocked he didn't bring up that's what we have the Insurrection Act for, but I'm sure he'll find a way to work that in a later podcast interview. Now, back to the article. The former Justice Department official who said the ruling gave Trump tacit approval said it was also a roadmap for Trump for how to avoid prosecution. He said Trump showed in his first term that he is careful not to overtly ask someone to do something illegal. The official predicted that would continue. Quote, "The way that Trump works is that he never tells anyone to do anything overtly," the former official said. "He hints, he pushes, he prods. He never needed to direct these people to do it. They went ahead and did it on their own."
Yep, typical mob boss behavior, right? And the article says another former Justice Department official expressed support for Justice Amy Coney Barrett's concurrence, which would limit a president's immunity. The former official said Roberts' sweeping majority opinion erred when it said investigators could not use a president's communications with the attorney general as evidence of a crime. Quote, "If the president and his attorney general are having a late night drink in the basement and talking about how to break into the Democratic National Committee headquarters, such a communication should not be off limits as an evidentiary matter in a criminal prosecution merely because it's a communication between the president and his attorney general." Now, that is one of the former DOJ officials. Supporters and opponents of the ruling agreed that it would come down to career civil servants to refuse to carry out improper illegal orders from Trump or any other future president. But if you've fired 50,000 people in the civil service jobs, thanks to Schedule F, and replaced them with Trump loyalists, and then have all of your political appointees in these agencies be nothing but Trump loyalists, nobody's going to refuse to carry out improper or illegal orders from Trump. Now, former senior official at the FBI, which conducts federal criminal investigations and is part of the Justice Department, said agents will not carry out legal orders because the agents do not have absolute immunity and could be prosecuted themselves. Of course, unless Trump says, "Go ahead, do it, and I'll pardon you," like he did with the DHS. Quote, "No one below the president has immunity." That's what the former senior FBI official said. So anyone who does this is putting themselves in legal jeopardy. You're going to have to rely on that pardon, right? So the first former Justice Department official who Trump publicly attacked for a stance he took said that that's naive. He said the ruling would embolden Trump and they would continue to use public attacks, as he did in his first term, to discredit special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation and slow other probes of his conduct. The use of tweets where Trump openly attacks prosecutors and government employees, often by name, directly interferes with the functioning of the Justice Department. It intimidates prosecutors to do things they might not normally do. It is obviously a way to pressure employees. That's what the official said, citing his own personal experience. It's hard for a career civil servant to be on the other end of that, unquote. So you're a former Justice Department guy. What are your thoughts on what these former Justice Department folks have said?
Well, the first question is, if you're that first former Justice Department official, what you stated is exactly the theory of the employment lawsuit that I've got pending against the FBI and DOJ. And if you're not already somebody that we've deposed, and regardless, if you want to come in and repeat those same words, that would be lovely. But I mean, that's right. That is exactly the way Trump operates. Everybody knows that. Michael Cohen has said that time and time again, that before he was the president, he behaved like a mob boss. He wouldn't write things down. He wouldn't tell you to do something. Everybody just knew what he wanted to do, that it is 100% like a mob boss would behave, because you don't ever tell anybody go do something illegal. As to whether or not, I mean, I've spent a lot of time talking with folks and doing some tabletop exercises and other things, talking about like how, in worst case scenario, how could Trump weaponize folks like the FBI or DHS or all the subordinate agencies. And I do think that there would be a huge problem, even if he offered immunity, that the overwhelming majority of agents across organizations would refuse to do things that would shock the conscience, right? You know, go round up this person, detain him without any process because they're a political
shoot him in the legs or whatever.
Now, that is very different from saying, could you find 50, 60, 70 agents you could bring in to a strike force or team working out of, Amarillo, Texas, where you know that Judge Kaczmarek was the one person who would sign off on any sort of process you wanted to, do shady things. That's a different proposition. But from a damage perspective, the good news is I don't think you're going to have a massive mobilization of, tens of thousands of government stormtroopers willing to do Trump's bidding. I don't see that happening. I think some agencies, I look at some of the positions the Border Patrol Union have taken with regard to Trump, and it's really troubling to me. And so what might happen at the border, I am less optimistic about. But, the response to that is like, oh, okay, well, then fine. Then we'll just marginalize these agencies. We'll tell them to do something. And if they refuse to do it, fine, you're fired. And then even if we can't turn the FBI into your force of stormtroopers, we turn it into a 4,000 person agency because everybody leaves. And then you can enable some militia, deputize some militia via whomever it is. So, or Eric Prince, go to Eric Prince and, hire a bunch of, sort of mercenaries to go do militia type activities in the U.S. I mean, there are a lot of ways to do mischief, but I do think even I would be shocked, one, if Trump does not offer immunity to folks to do things. They're foolish if they do not get that writing in ahead of time. And I'm not saying they should do that, but at least according to the Supreme Court ruling, he's absolutely allowed to do it. So I'm going to ask you and tell you to do illegal things. Here's your pardon for it. I have exclusive authority to pardon you. A prospective pardon, go out and do it. I think there are going to be some people out there who are going to do that for power, for favor. And it goes to I think at the end of the day, the Supreme Court, the majority at least, has somewhere in the head this idea that Trump has been persecuted by a bunch of never Trump political leaders and prosecutors and deep state people who have really given him a raw deal, and none of this is appropriate, and just simply don't understand the absolute abuses that took place. That this was not something of, Bill Barr talking about like, oh, Trump was being hobbled by, the FBI's investigations. No, Trump was repeatedly going out and pushing the law and pushing, up against U.S. national security interests. And that is what caused all this, not, the deep state out to get him. And I worry that, the mindset, you would find a lot of like-minded people in the justices that you kind of, like if you were sitting down listening to Bill Barr, I think there's a very similar perspective on things. And I think they've handed him a loaded gun, and God knows what happens.
Yeah, and I should say, like, God forbid Trump wins the election in November. I think we should make an effort to make it clear to everybody who works in the federal agencies that you are not immune. Only Trump is immune. You are not immune from criminal prosecution. And if you want to go ahead and trust a promise from Donald Trump that he will grant you a pardon, now, granted, he can stop any and all investigations and prosecutions into you, and he's going to do his best to make sure we never have another free and fair election. So there's also that possibility that these folks would have to weigh, but we should just make sure they know they're not immune.
Yeah, and where this is going to get particularly problematic, I think, is with DOD, with the military, and particularly the Army. If Trump brings in folks, whether they're National Guard or mobilizes, brings active duty folks to quell, public protest, I have little doubt that you could get elements of the military to do what they did in the summer of 2020, flying helicopters low over crowds to disperse them. I think you could, get to some pretty brutal crowd control tactics. But I do think there's a difference between saying, okay, here's live ammunition and shooting to the crowd. Right. That you would find. And I think there'll be some general officers who are going to have some very, very difficult decisions to make. And then you hope and pray that kind of going down the line that, people in our military understand the oath they took to the Constitution, and not follow some outrageously, for them, illegal order that might come to, again, and Trump is, everybody's like, oh, hypothetically. It's not hypothetical, Allison. He said, he asked, right? I mean, I think it was Esper who said, yeah, he asked about whether or not we could just like shoot him in the legs. I mean, yep. This is already, and people are like, no, that would be illegal. Well, not anymore.
No, not anymore. Not anymore. And, as like I said, he told people just go ahead and do it. I'll pardon you. When it came to some of the other things that he was asking, particularly DHS to do. And in response to the George Floyd protests. So anyway, absolutely terrifying to think about. Vote, talk to your friend, talk to your friends, talk to your family, tell them to vote, please. So we don't have to entertain these hypotheticals. All right, we do have a little more news to get to, but we have to take one last quick break, so everybody stick around. We'll be right back.
Welcome back. Our last list of new patrons to thank includes Laura Nelson, Donna Schroeder, Sue Ridquist, Kimberly Hamilton, Meosis for Ava, Claudia Ramirez, and looking forward to seeing you in Seattle. I am jealous. You have that trip out to Seattle, and that's going to be a blast, I'm sure. And Portland too, right?
Meiosis forever.
There you go. Yeah.
I could be wrong now.
Thank you. Thank all of you. I know. Thank you for your support of the program and the pod. And with that, our last story is a trip, right? And this is it comes from Josh Fiallo at the Daily Beast. A thread of bombshell text messages made public Thursday alleged that Donald Trump's 2020 campaign settled, quote unquote, multiple seedy lawsuits for a man described only as Boris. Leading to conjecture it could be a powerful Trump world figure. I think it's more than conjecture at this point, but those messages were revealed by A.J. Delgado, a former staffer on Trump's 2016 campaign, who's embroiled in a lawsuit against the current campaign, alleging she was taken advantage of and raped by her former superior, Jason Miller, not someone named Boris, but yet another fine, upstanding, alleged member of behavior
Trump
and member of Trump circles, right? Now, as part of that lawsuit, Delgado, who's a lawyer who's representing herself, filed a motion Thursday that included a text thread she claims to be between her and Jenna Ellis, another ex-Trump staffer who is a co-defendant in his election subversion case in Georgia. The alleged text began with Delgado asking if Ellis knew of anyone who, quote, complained of gender discrimination, pregnancy discrimination, or sexual harassment during Trump's 2020 campaign. She wrote that the messages were to remain between them and pleaded with her to, quote unquote, tell me the truth. The second texter, who Delgado claims is Ellis, responded, quote, yes, off the record, Boris. The campaign settled multiple suits, unquote. The second number added that Delgado should subpoena the ex-Trump campaign staffer Michael Glassner and assured Delgado that she would, of course, tell the truth, even though they may not agree on everything. In my mind, there's no way Delgado, as an attorney representing herself, knows full well what the penalty would be if she's, saying things that are false, making false statements. She's not, in my opinion, going to put her bar license at risk or, legal action against her, and encourage that by, blatantly misrepresenting things. And there's no way in hell that if Ellis is saying, oh, it's Boris, it's only Boris Epstein. There's nobody else. There's no other Boris. And that it would be so familiar that it's, oh, Boris, I don't need to tell you the last name because you know the last name because there's really only one Boris of that stature and everybody knows who it is. It's Boris Epstein. And by the way, Boris Epstein has a history, I think, of alleged assault, and I think might have a record, if I'm not mistaken, or at least had some run-in with the law for previous assaults.
Yeah, I'll get into that. And even though the Daily Beast has not independently verified the authenticity of the text messages, I agree with you. I don't think that AJ Delgado would risk her bar license. And neither Ellis, Delgado, or Trump, any Trump representative, responded to questions for comment. It's the second time the texts were submitted as evidence by Delgado after the Trump campaign's lawyers asked her to resubmit them without the names redacted. And an offer to mark them as confidential appeared to be ignored. Oops. Only a first name was used in the text thread, but speculation is rife that the troubled advisor could be Boris Epstein, an analyst for Trump's 2020 campaign, who remained a trusted ear for Trump to this day and then switched over to becoming an attorney once they started trying to get at his emails for the prosecutors. Epstein also did not respond to a request for comment, and no official sources have made any confirmation it's him. This will, it is, but allegedly, I'm pretty sure it's him. The texts did not specify what sort of lawsuits Boris may have faced, but Epstein was accused, like you said, of repeatedly groping two sisters in an Arizona bar. This is in Scottsdale, Old Town Scottsdale, where I used to live. This was in 2021 until a bouncer and some cops intervened and removed him. Epstein was slapped with a trio of sexual misconduct counts, but they were later dropped. and he instead pled guilty to disorderly conduct. Epstein paid a fine and agreed to go on probation but served no jail time. And those allegations were resurfaced by Forbes reporter Zach Everson, who first shared Delgado's motion in a thread on X. And Pete, body cam footage from Epstein's arrest shows police speaking separately to Epstein and his accusers, and one of the women told police the incident began after he approached her group and invited them to his table for free drinks, a request they took him up on. Once at the table, the women claimed Epstein began touching them inappropriately, grabbing them by their waists, pulling them to his crotch, according to a police report. Epstein, by the way, this dude's only 41, has also found himself in legal trouble for his alleged efforts to help Trump overturn the election. He pled not guilty last month in Arizona to 9 felony charges related to the last presidential election, and he has reportedly had at least $90,000 worth of his lawyer's fees paid for by the Save America PAC.
You know, I'm sensing a trend here, and this is my conjecture.
Yeah.
You know, Walt Nauta, accused of, sexual misconduct during his time, I think, in the Navy and or the White House after he left, taken care of apparently by Trump. And suddenly that loyalty is not just like, I've got loyalty to you, but in part I have loyalty because there's all this dirt in my closet, skeletons in my closet that you know about, that if I were to ever break ranks with you, I know you've got that leverage over me. So whether it's Walt Nauta, whether it is Boris, whether or not, by the way, it's David Pecker, and that safe of catch and kill, allegedly, a lot relating to Trump. What happened to that safe? Where's that safe? And I ask because another thing not reported on, since our media has been so busy talking about Joe Biden's age, is a lot of Epstein files were released. And guess what? Donald Trump is all over them, calling him all the time, showing up in the flight logs, allegations that he assaulted women. You may be surprised to hear this because people haven't reported it, but it's there. And look, even if these are of questionable credibility, it's still newsworthy. And it's all just this part and parcel of slimy behavior being taken care of, creating a loyalty for fear of, real harm and trouble if you break ranks.
Yeah, agreed. I talked to Miles Taylor about breaking ranks, right? Because he's like the ultimate rank breaker with his anonymous Lodestar Washington Post article, then his anonymous book that he came out with, and then finally Blowback, where he put his name on it, said that it's extremely difficult to break ranks, right? Especially in the Trump tribe, because of what can happen. I mean, Jack Smith just filed a ton of evidence showing that once Trump goes after you, you will receive violent threats at the very least, right?
Yeah, and there's no expectation in my mind. Again, this is well known to everybody who has worked in and around Trump. This is well known to anybody in the government who was there during the Trump presidency. This is absolutely something, again, what Trump might do. Project 2025, these are not hypothetical things because he has done or wanted and asked about doing all of the things that he has now been empowered to do by the Supreme Court. So it is horrible. I would, if you have not read Project 2025, go out there and pull it up and read it. There are a ton, thankfully, a lot of attention now being paid to it and Trump trying to backpedal away from it because of how horrible it is. But the fact of the matter is, he absolutely is aware of it. It is made up of his people. It has across the board folks like Stephen Miller and Russ Vogt from OMB and Johnny McAtee, who is sort of doing White House personnel vetting and right-hand guy. All of these people are in advisory capacities or more around Project 2025. Jason Miller's like, I don't know anything about it, but yet he filmed a couple of commercials or some sort of, social media appearances where he's got at least 2 copies of the report on a table next to him on the bit. So don't tell me Trump doesn't know about this. Don't tell me Trump is not embracing this. Don't tell me it isn't the blueprint for his future administration. It absolutely is. And there's nothing in there, whether you care about women's reproductive rights, whether you care about immigration issues, whether you care about the weaponization of the government, whether you care about veterans the environment, benefits, whether you care about veterans benefits, any issue, it is horrific across the board. I mean, it's amazing. It's like 0 for 100 There's not one policy in there where you're like, oh, that's sensible. That's great. No, it's abusive across the board, horrible across the board, anti-democratic across the board. And it sounds like, oh, Pete, you're getting a little carried away. I'm not really, truly. I plead with you. If you have not read it, go find it online. Go find a summary from somebody you trust, a neutral news source, and read what it says, because it's terrifying.
Yeah, and you're right. Trump can't. He can't remove himself from his inextricable link to Project 2025. I think he even has a campaign surrogate out there pitching it. Yeah, it is pretty terrifying, and I think that's what we need to pivot to. I know that some folks in the media, I know Nicole Wallace on Deadline White House is taking time most days to point out something about Project 2025 and just, sounding the alarm bells. I think that's important. I think all the media should get on board with this, sounding the alarm bells. And, if you're going to hold one candidate to a set of standards, you should hold them both to that set of standards. Everybody was kvetching about the fact that Biden's sit-down interview with George Stephanopoulos, which, by the way, the room tone was terrible, and I'm not suggesting there was a conspiracy. The only conspiracy is that they had a really bad audio engineer that day. But sat down with him for only 22 minutes of interview time. When asked if Trump would sit down with Stephanopoulos, declined. No. But what are we focusing on? The Biden interview with Stephanopoulos. It's blowing my mind, the disparate treatment here of the two candidates, given the stakes. I don't know what the press thinks, if they think they're going to still be around if Donald Trump gets into office. It blows my mind, honestly, truly blows my mind. But thank you all for listening to Clean Up on Aisle 45. I know many of you also listen to Jack and the Beans. So appreciate you supporting independent media just by listening, sending it to others to listen for free if that's the case. That helps. I think it really helps, because there's so much other news that's happening right now that's kind of been set aside for the palace intrigue, and the fear mongering and the clicks and eyes for profit that we're seeing right now. Not by all of the folks, but by a vast number of them. So thank you again for listening. We really appreciate it. We'll be back next week. Well, of course, we'll have a bonus episode for patrons this weekend. I'm going to be on the road this week. We got Polaris Hall in Portland, Triple Door in Seattle. It's going to be me and Dana Goldberg, and Andy McCabe will be out there. It's going to be a really fun time. So I look forward to seeing everybody in Seattle. Pete, and Portland. Pete, do you have any final thoughts before we get out of here today?
No, hopefully next week we're back to talking about the news, and we get the news media talking about the news instead of like endless speculation about what Joe Biden is or isn't going to do. But, hang in there. Everybody just stay calm and carry on, right? We'll get there. But we all got to keep focused. Yeah.
And stay focused and head down. We got a lot of work to do. We'll see you next week. I've been Allison Gill.
And I'm Pete Struck.
Clean Up on Aisle 45 is written, researched, and produced by Allison Gill, with editing by Molly Hockey. Our art and logo design are by Joelle Reeder and Moxie Design Studios, and our music is composed and performed by Adam Orr. Clean Up on Aisle 45 is a proud member of the MSW Media Network, a collection of creator-owned podcasts dedicated to news, politics, and justice. For more information, visit mswmedia.com. MSW Media.